Hello there, this is John Franquez and continue with the American Presidency series. I'm outside in the patio right here. My air conditioning broke down and there's no way I could do this in the garage. But anyway, we are on our fourth president, James Madison, who I described to you as Little Jimmy. Little Jimmy is as known as the father of our Constitution, a very fascinating guy. He was the shortest president the country's ever had, 5 foot 4 inches tall. He seemed smaller because he weighed about 100 pounds. He served in the American Revolution, but he never really saw any active combat. If you hear a plane, I'm sorry. I'm out here in the outside in the patio, as I said. Anyway, he never served with in active duty. One of the reasons being is that he was so small. He was very frail. His dad was a tobacco planter. This guy, Madison, though, was very knowledgeable. And he learned several languages. He learned political science. He learned geography. And he actually learned Hebrew. Some say that he wanted to join the clergy. He was a very shy guy. And when he got into discussions or had to defend his beliefs or his philosophy or to pass a law, anything that he wanted to do, he didn't rely on passion because he didn't have a lot of passion, but he had a lot of logic. And he won many battles against passionate orators. He would take their discussions and take those discussions apart by logic, word by word. Anyway, he was the father of our Constitution. He leaned towards, this is the strange thing, he was a very smart man. However, he leaned toward having a strong central government for a while. Then he leaned toward Jefferson having a weaker government. Then he went back to wishing to have a stronger government. He was engaged when he was very young. However, the girlfriend that he had at the time, she broke off the engagement for some reason. She got cold feet, didn't want to get married. And for a long time, he thought he would never get married. At 43, he was still a bachelor when he met Dolly Payne Todd, who became, of course, Dolly Madison. He was 43, she was 26. Dolly had been married before. She had 2 sons. One of them died the same day that her husband died during a yellow fever epidemic. And when she married James Madison, who was 17 years older, her religion, the Quakers, they kicked her out of the religion. She could not marry outside her religion because she chose to do so. They actually kicked her out. So anyway, I should mention a few things about Dolly Madison. When she married James Madison, and James Madison became Secretary of State to Thomas Jefferson, Madison and Jefferson were good friends. They played chess together and so forth. Remember that Thomas Jefferson was a widower, and he never remarried. So he had no first lady. Dolly Madison would often serve as a hostess at his functions and dinners and all these sort of things. And everybody loved Dolly Madison. This continued for many, many years. They loved Dolly. Dolly Madison, once she got into the White House on her own right, when her husband James Madison became president, she is the quintessential real first lady. Keep in mind, Martha Washington, our first lady, didn't really want to be in the White House. Abigail Adams, our second first lady, everybody loved her. She was a very knowledgeable person, but it was mostly politics and that kind of thing. Jefferson had no wife at the time. So when Dolly Madison came in, she had different ideas. She had the idea that you could have parties and invite enemies from both parties to come to the White House and have a couple of drinks, chit-chat, have a dinner, whatever. When they went back to Congress and argued, it was hard to argue when you just became friends with somebody. So these functions served their political purpose as well. She decided to get Congress to furnish the White House. Before that, remember, Washington never lived in the White House. Adams moved in for the last year or so. Jefferson moved his own personal furniture in, then took it with him. Dolly Madison got Congress to approve, let's furnish the White House. So again, she was the first real first lady. Okay, back to James Madison. James Madison would have had an easy time being president because things were good. By that point, there was about 20 years or so had gone by since Washington became president. Things were pretty much solid. The economy was, it kind of rose and fell under Jefferson, was rising again. Things were good except for one thing, and this defined Madison's presidency, the War of 1812. What happened? The British, again, the British. The British were blocking our trade. arming Indians, Native Americans that were taking land or encroaching on our land, but also the British were sequestering our ships. So Madison said, we can't have that. He goes in front of Congress and says, we're going to declare war against Britain. Everybody said, are you crazy? Mr. President, we have about 20 ships, naval ships. The British have about 1,000. Madison, however, stuck to his guns and said, no, we are going to war. And guess what, everybody? We got our butts kicked. Now, a lot of people are going to say, but I thought we won the War of 1812. I'm going to get to that. We suffered humiliating defeats. Yes, we won some battles here and there, but all in all, we got our butts kicked. And one of the major battles that we lost was in Washington, D.C. Listen to this. The British invade Washington, D.C. Before they got there, the president himself manned some cannons, went out there in front of the army, and fought against the British. But while they were doing this, the British fought back, and in the Americans, including the president, our commander-in-chief, they all had to retreat and run. They took off. In the meantime, Dolly Madison was in the White House. She refused to leave until she heard news from her husband. When she saw that the army had taken off, she said, I'm not leaving until we take that painting down of George Washington. They took the painting down with help from one of her slaves, Paul Jennings, and they had to leave. The Americans left. The British invaded Washington, D.C., and they burned our government buildings, including the White House. They looted the place. They looted our capital. And what happened? Strangely enough, the British could have stayed there and occupied the city, but however, a storm came. The storm came, knocked out the fire, and the British, for some reason, left. Thank goodness. A lot of people said, well, maybe God brought the storm that caused the British to leave. However, what happened? The British were by that point tired of war. A couple of years had gone by the way. The War of 1812 didn't end very shortly. But there was a peace treaty signed between Britain and the United States. Nothing was really concluded. Nobody gained anything except peace. They signed the peace treaty, the Treaty of Ghent, it was called. But because it takes so long for letters to go from one place to the other, this peace treaty had to come by ship all the way from England, from Europe, I should say. And everybody thought the war was still going on. So we had the Battle of New Orleans, where Andrew Jackson became a war hero. We won the Battle of New Orleans greatly, one of our greatest battle victories in the War of 1812. And when that occurred, a short time after that, the peace treaty arrived, and everybody thought that the British surrendered because of our victory in the Battle of New Orleans. So everybody thought that we won the War of 1812. In the meantime, Madison, very popular, becomes reelected very easily. Okay. Dolly Madison, again, I told you she furnished the White House. She was very vivacious. Everybody loved her. There were even rumors that she was having affairs because, she was so friendly with the men. But no, all of that is not true. Those are just rumors and political attacks. James Madison, in contrast, was not a vivacious guy. He was kind of somber, which is kind of strange. People say that he enjoyed jokes. He enjoyed dirty jokes and all this, but he was always very kind of shy. Didn't like to party. I think there was health reasons for that. He was kind of frail. He never weighed over 100 pounds. I told you he was very, very short. He preferred to be in bed. He didn't really want to party that much, but he did. And what happened, though? They retired. Madison, again, refused that third term, and they went home. However, remember I mentioned that Dolly had a son? That son's name was John. But everybody called him by his last name, Paine, and he was, believe me. Dolly Madison's son, Paine, was a drunkard. He was a heavy drinker. He gambled. He had many fights and shootings, constantly went to debtor prison, and constantly got arrested. His stepdad, James Madison, had to bail him out, pay money. When they retired to their home, Madison had to mortgage his property to help pay the debts that his stepson was incurring. Paine continued this process. This went on until he was in his 50s. So it wasn't like an 18-year-old or a teenager that was getting in trouble. No, this went on and on. Anyway, Madison died around the age of 68, worried about his finances and his money. I should mention that Paine had been sent to Europe to see if he could get a career, political career of some kind. Instead, he partied away, got put in jail a few times, got into trouble. So he died. Dolly Madison missed Washington, and I'm sure she was a sad widow. She decides, big mistake, to leave her property and the farms in the hands of her no-good son. She went to Washington. And while she was in Washington, her son didn't know how to manage a farm. On top of that, tobacco prices had been dropping. There were some other outside troubles. Dolly Madison was in Washington, hitting the town. She gets a letter from one of her slaves. Her son, Payne, had run up debts so high that a sheriff was going to come and confiscate property, including the slaves, and was going to auction them off. So the slave begged Dolly Madison, please, madam, come back. Sell us to people that you know so we don't break up the families. Help us, help us, help us. Dolly Madison rushes back home. She couldn't do anything. The debts were too high. She had to sell her slaves. And remember, slaves were considered property. And if you have a mortgage, you can mortgage a slave, you can mortgage your property. You don't pay your debts, the sheriff comes down to your place, takes away your property, and takes away your slaves. But anyway, she managed to sell her slaves. One of her slaves, Paul Jennings, I'm going to show you his picture right here. This is an actual photograph of Paul Jennings that I wanted to show you. Kind of a remarkable man that I'm going to be you should look it up. I can't get into it too deeply, but Paul Jennings was a remarkable man. And after the slaves were sold, he was sold to Daniel Webster, famous Daniel Webster, the orator, the lawyer. Read about him. But anyway, he was sold to Daniel Webster, who allowed him to work off and buy his own freedom. Then Webster would send food to Dolly Madison. He'd send Paul Jennings to, take a little food over to the former first lady, the old lady, the poor thing. Jennings, the former slave, would go there to bring food, and he found her so thin that Mr. Jennings, very big heart that this man had, the former slave of the first lady, would give money out of his own pocket to help her out. Congress heard about her troubles and decided to help her out. So they gave her a pension. So now she had some money coming in. But Congress, in its wisdom, said, we're not going to let the son, we're not going to give her the money because she's going to give it to her son. They did something else, to make sure that she was taken care of. Her son was so angry about this that he actually sued Congress, wanted to sue Congress. And finally, Dolly Madison got angry and told her son in a letter, no, you're not going to do that. These are our friends. So the lawsuit never took place. Now, here's a picture of Dolly Madison. This is an actual photograph, a dagger type, whatever they call it. But anyway, this is what she looked like. Now, if you look at the dress that she's wearing, if you see any other photographs, she's always wearing the same dress. Some feel it's the only fancy dress that she had left. Anyway, she stayed in Washington, and when she passed away, in her last words, I'm sorry to say, her last words were, my poor boy, my poor boy. She passed away, left half of what she had left to her niece, who was always taking care of her. Her son Payne sued the niece, lost a lawsuit. 2 years later, her son Payne also passed away, something related to alcoholism. Anyway, that's basically it. Madison had definitely an easy going to a point, except for that damn War of 1812 that messed things up. But other than that, read about James Madison and read about the War of 1812. Read about Paul Jennings, a very fascinating man. Former slave Paul Jennings. He has a history of his own. In the meantime, our next president, fifth president, James Monroe. James Monroe put in one of the most important documents ever in American history, but we're going to discuss that in our next segment with our next president, James Monroe. In the meantime, this is John Franquez. Please subscribe, comment below. Sayonara.